Okay, so you want to own a parking garage. No inventory, no customers to please, no product to build. Just a concrete box that people pay you to leave their car in. You buy the structure, you put up a gate, and money falls out of the sky every single time someone needs a spot. It sounds like the laziest business model ever invented. Here's the problem. You are looking at the one moment of the day when a parking garage looks like it's working. Walk past one at 8:45 on a weekday morning, and the line of cars waiting to get in looks like proof of a gold mine. What you're not seeing is the other 22 hours, the ones where half the garage sits empty, quietly losing money on a mortgage that doesn't care whether anyone parked there or not. The truth is that a parking garage is not really a real estate business. It is a business built entirely on predicting human behavior down to the hour, and the moment you understand that, everything about how these things make money and how they quietly go bankrupt starts to make sense. Let's start with what it actually costs to get into this business, because buy a lot, put up a gate is nowhere near the whole story. There isn't one kind of parking garage. There are several, and each one is a completely different bet. At the bottom, you have surface lots, just flat asphalt with painted lines and maybe a gate arm. Cheap to build, cheap to run, but low capacity per acre. Above that sit standalone parking structures, the multi-level concrete decks you see near stadiums and downtown cores, built purely to hold cars and nothing else. Above that, mixed-use garages, parking podiums underneath office towers, apartment buildings, or shopping centers, where the parking itself is almost never the primary business. It's a supporting utility for whatever sits on top of it. And then there's airport and event parking, a category built around extreme peaks, where a single football game or a single flight departure wave can fill an entire structure in 90 minutes and empty it just as fast. Each of these is a different bet on the same underlying question. Do you make your money from steady daily commuters paying a predictable monthly rate, or from unpredictable bursts of short-term parkers paying a premium for convenience? That single decision shapes every other number in the business. Now here's where the naive mental model breaks down. You think the expensive part is the concrete. It isn't. The expensive part is building a structure that can hold thousands of tons of moving steel safely for decades, while satisfying a mountain of fire code, structural engineering, and accessibility requirements. A standalone parking structure with 5 or 6 levels can run tens of millions of dollars to build from the ground up once you account for the land, the structural engineering needed to support that much weight, fire suppression systems, ventilation for exhaust fumes, lighting for every corner and stairwell, elevators, and stripping. And that's before a single payment gate goes in. Buying an existing garage is usually cheaper up front, but this is where things get interesting, because not every garage is the same garage. There's a huge gap between a full downtown structure with a waiting list of monthly tenants and a half-empty deck in a neighborhood that emptied out after its main office tower lost its tenants. The second one might sell for a fraction of what it cost to build, and it stays cheap for a very specific reason: nobody's coming. So here's the first thing nobody tells you about buying a parking garage. You're not really buying a building. You're buying a bet on the demand of a 3-block radius, and the price tag tells you almost everything about which side of that bet you're on. Now let's talk about what can go wrong before you've collected a single dollar. Deferred maintenance is the first trap, and it's brutal in this industry specifically because concrete parking structures take a beating that most buildings never face. Every winter, cars track in road salt, which eats through concrete and corrodes the steel reinforcement bars inside it. This is called structural spalling, and it is not cosmetic. A garage that looks fine from the outside can have rebar rusting and expanding inside its support columns, which is a multi-million-dollar repair problem if it's caught late. Waterproof membrane systems on the top deck need replacing every couple of decades, and that alone can run into the hundreds of thousands of dollars for a mid-sized structure. Elevators need constant servicing. Fire suppression systems need annual certification. None of this shows up in a walkthrough. It shows up in an engineering inspection report that a lot of first-time buyers skip to save a few $1,000s right before they inherit a 7-figure structural problem. Second, there's the technology layer almost nobody budgets for correctly. Modern garages run on gate systems, license plate recognition cameras, payment kiosks, and increasingly app-based entry that has to sync in real time with a payment processor. That equipment isn't cheap, and it isn't optional anymore because customers expect to pay with their phone, not fumble with cash at 11 p.m., a full technology retrofit on an older structure. Cameras, gates, software licensing, payment integration can run anywhere from the low hundreds of thousands into the millions, depending on the size of the structure. And here's the catch. This equipment needs to be replaced on a cycle, roughly every 7 to 10 years, because payment technology moves fast and a garage running on outdated hardware starts leaking revenue through slow lines, failed transactions, and customers who simply give up and park somewhere else. Now location. This is the decision that separates a printing press from a slow bankruptcy. Unlike almost any other real estate asset, a parking garage's value is entirely dependent on what's within easy walking distance, not the neighborhood in general, the literal block. A garage 2 blocks from a stadium behaves completely differently than the same size garage 6 blocks away, even though 6 blocks is a 5-minute walk. Event-driven demand collapses fast with distance because people will pay a premium to avoid the last few minutes of walking, especially in bad weather. Meanwhile, a garage next to a major office tower lives or dies by that tower's occupancy rate, something the garage owner has zero control over. If the anchor tenant in that office building relocates or shifts to permanent remote work, the garage doesn't just lose a few customers, it can lose the majority of its predictable monthly revenue overnight. The exact same trapdoor that empties out office parking after a single corporate decision made in a boardroom you were never in. Now we get to the part of this business that actually explains everything else, the utilization curve. Picture 2 different garages side by side. Same size, same price. One fills up completely for 3 hours every weekday morning and sits nearly empty the rest of the time. The other one stays at a steady 60% full around the clock. Which one is more valuable? It's the second one, and this is the single most important idea in the entire parking business. A structure that peaks at 100% for 3 hours and drops to 20% the rest of the day is a structure that was built for a capacity it barely uses. All that unused concrete, all those unused spaces, they still cost money in property tax, insurance, and maintenance, whether a single car is parked in them or not. The garage that stays at a steady 60% is generating revenue across nearly every hour of the day, without ever needing to turn cars away during the peak. This is why sophisticated parking operators obsess over something called the parking mix, combining monthly reserved parkers, who guarantee predictable income, but use their spot only part of the day, with short-term transient parkers, who pay a much higher hourly rate but only show up in bursts. A garage that's 70% monthly and 30% transient can smooth its income while still capturing premium pricing during the busiest hours. Get that mix wrong, lean too heavily on one type of customer, and you've built a structure that's either safe but underpriced, or lucrative but dangerously exposed to a single bad event. This is also why parking garages love dynamic pricing, the same hourly rate that jumps from $4 to $22 on a concert night. It isn't greed for its own sake. It's the mechanism that lets a fixed number of spaces generate radically different revenue depending on demand. Because the cost of running the garage barely changes whether it's 40% full or 100% full. The marginal cost of one more car parking is close to zero. No extra staff, no extra electricity worth mentioning, maybe a few cents of wear on the gate arm. Every dollar above the break-even point flows almost straight to profit. This is the same principle that made gym memberships so profitable off unused subscriptions and mall kiosks so valuable per square foot. Fixed costs stay flat. Marginal revenue is where the real money lives. There's a seasonal wrinkle here too. Retail-adjacent garages see predictable holiday spikes. Stadium and arena garages see spikes tied entirely to sports schedule or concert calendar that can change year to year. Airport garages see spikes around major travel weeks and quiet stretches in between. Experienced operators build their entire cash flow model around these known cycles, banking the surplus from peak months to cover the slow ones. The operators who get into trouble are the ones who look at one great month, a Super Bowl weekend, a holiday shopping season, and assume that's the new normal instead of the spike it actually is. Now let's talk about the psychology, because pricing a parking spot is as much behavioral economics as it is real estate. Drivers consistently underestimate how much they're willing to pay to avoid walking an extra 5 minutes or circling the block looking for street parking. This is why garages near high-demand destinations can charge rates that look absurd on paper and still fill up. The value being sold isn't really the square footage. It's the anxiety being removed, the guarantee that a spot will be there when you need it. And this is also why monthly reserved parking commands such a premium over daily rates, even though the reserved spot sits empty on weekends and holidays. The customer isn't paying for usage, they're paying for certainty. Now let's talk about whether this business can actually survive at scale, because the honest answer is, sometimes not, and the collapse pattern looks eerily similar to every other real estate business built on a single anchor. Consider what's happened to downtown parking structures in cities where major employers shifted to hybrid or remote work. A garage that once relied on 5,000 monthly commuter parkers from a handful of office towers doesn't lose that revenue gradually. It can lose it in a single fiscal quarter the moment those companies downsize their office footprint or let leases lapse. The building doesn't change. The concrete is exactly the same. But the revenue that was supposed to service the debt used to build it evaporates, and unlike a store that can simply close and release its space to someone else, a parking garage is structurally almost impossible to repurpose. The floor-to-ceiling heights are too low for most other uses. The ramps eat up huge amounts of otherwise usable square footage, and converting one into apartments or offices routinely costs more than building something new from scratch. So how does a parking garage actually make money in plain mechanical terms? The core engine is simple: monthly parker revenue plus transient hourly revenue minus fixed operating costs. If a mid-size garage has fixed monthly costs, debt service, insurance, security, cleaning, utilities of around $60,000, and it needs to hit that number through a mix of $150 a month reserved parkers and hourly transient traffic, the math works when occupancy stays high across both categories. Below a certain utilization threshold, the garage is losing money every month regardless of how full it looks during the morning rush. Above it, additional parked cars are almost pure profit, because remember, the marginal cost per car is close to zero. Here's the volatility that comes right after that good news. New garages, or newly renovated ones, rarely hit stable occupancy on day one. It can take a year or more of building a reliable base of monthly tenants before the numbers settle into something predictable. And during that ramp-up window, every empty level is still costing money in debt service and insurance, regardless of how many cars are actually inside it. So if you do decide to buy a parking garage, remember the one thing that actually determines whether you succeed. It was never really about how full the garage looks during the morning rush. It's about how well the building survives the other 22 hours of the day, and how much of its income depends on a single tenant, a single stadium, or a single office tower that could decide, on a Tuesday afternoon in a meeting you'll never be in, that it doesn't need your spaces anymore.